Welcome 1958 Wheat Penny to my YouTube channel. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? Because today we're diving into one of the most mysterious and talked about pennies in American history, the 1958 Wheat Penny, a coin so ordinary looking that most people would never give it a second glance, yet so extraordinary that it has sparked rumors, auction frenzy, and collector obsession for decades. And before you even blink, let me tell you this right now. So you understand the stakes. The rarest known examples of the 1958 Philadelphia Wheat Penny have been whispered about at values soaring as high as $58 million. Yes, a single copper penny potentially worth more than private jets, beachfront mansions, and entire coin collections combined. And if that number alone didn't make your heart skip, stick with me until the very end, because this story only gets more unbelievable. And I'll also tease something even more shocking about the next coin coming up that most people completely underestimate. But for now, let's slow down and unravel how a humble 1958 penny became one of the most legendary what-ifs and holy grails in U.S. numismatics. Because 1958 was a historic year at the United States Mint, marking the final chapter of the beloved Lincoln wheat cent design that had been in circulation since 1909, and by this point America was changing fast. The post-war boom was in full swing, the space race was heating up, and the Mint was preparing to switch designs in 1959 to celebrate Lincoln's 150th birthday, which meant production pressure was intense, especially at the Philadelphia Mint, where billions of coins were struck annually with little room for error, or so they thought, because during this chaotic transition period, stories began to circulate about ultra-rare experimental strikes, transitional planchets, and mysterious anomalies that slipped through unnoticed, and the 1958 Wheat Penny sits right at the center of that storm, struck in plain copper with no mint mark, just like millions of others, yet rumored to exist in a handful of specimens that defy everything we know about normal production. And this is where collectors lean in closer, because while most 1958 wheat pennies are worth just a few cents, the legendary versions are said to exhibit razor-sharp details, unusual die characteristics, and in some accounts even experimental metal compositions that were never meant to leave the mint. And when one of these surfaced in private hands decades later, it sent shockwaves through the numismatic world, with insiders claiming that elite collectors were willing to pay almost any price to own what could be the final and most perfect wheat penny ever struck. And that's how the jaw-dropping $58 million figure entered the conversation, not as a casual estimate, but as a symbol of ultimate rarity, condition, and historical timing. And here's what makes it even more compelling: no official public auction has ever fully confirmed such a sale, which only fuels the mystery, because in rare coin circles, the most valuable pieces often trade quietly behind closed doors, brokered privately between billionaires who don't want publicity. And that secrecy turns the 1958 Wheat Penny into a modern legend, a coin that may exist in fewer than 5 examples worldwide, possibly even fewer. And if you're wondering why collectors would chase this coin so obsessively, it's because it represents the end of an era, the last breath of a design that carried America through 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and into the modern age. And when you combine that emotional weight with potential mint errors like double dies, ultra-proof-like strikes, or off-metal planchets rumored to have been tested in late 1958, you get a perfect storm of desirability. And imagine this: a young bank teller in the 1960s setting aside a shiny penny because it looked different, or a factory worker tossing loose change into a coffee can, never realizing that one coin in that pile could one day rewrite their family's future. Because that's the haunting truth about rare pennies like this: they don't announce themselves, they hide in plain sight. And even today, collectors still search old rolls, estate collections, and inherited jars, hoping lightning will strike twice. And if you're watching this right now, there's a real chance a similar story could be unfolding in your own home without you knowing it. And before we go further, let me pull you closer with this thought. If you think a 1958 penny being worth millions is wild, the next coin in this series is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about everyday change, and you do not want to miss that reveal later on. But staying with our 1958 Wheat Penny, another layer of intrigue comes from the Mint's internal documentation, or rather the lack of it, because there are gaps in the records from that year unexplained. die retirements, and whispers of special strikes prepared for presentation or testing that were never officially cataloged. And those gaps are where legends are born, because in numismatics, absence of evidence doesn't kill a story, it supercharges it, and collectors have spent decades comparing microscopic details, die markers, and strike quality to try and identify a true elite specimen. And when one surfaces with mirror-like fields, perfectly squared rims, and an almost unreal sharpness too. Lincoln's portrait, the excitement is electric, with phones ringing, offers flying, and confidentiality agreements signed. And one famous story tells of a collector who turned down seven-figure offers because they believed their coin was the real deal, the pinnacle example that could one day command tens of millions. And whether that exact sale ever happens publicly almost doesn't matter, because the belief itself drives value, and belief is powerful in the world of rare coins. And here's something else most people don't realize: condition is everything, because a normal circulated 1958 wheat penny might buy you a cup of coffee at best. But a pristine, possibly experimental strike in near-perfect condition transforms into a museum-grade artifact, and that's why experts say most people would spend this coin without realizing its fortune, because only trained eyes notice the tiny differences: the weight, the ring, the strike depth, and those clues separate pocket change from history. And as we move closer to the end of this story, I want you to keep one thing in mind: the 1958 wheat penny isn't just about money. It's about timing, survival, and luck: the right coin from the right year in the right condition, escaping circulation against all odds. And that's why collectors lose sleep over it. And if you've ever inherited old coins, rolled pennies from a bank, or even checked your spare change casually, this is your reminder to look again, because somewhere out there, one of these legendary pennies could still be waiting to be recognized. And just when you think this is as crazy as it gets, remember, I promised you something even more unbelievable is coming next. A coin from another mint, same year, that flips this entire story on its head in a way that shocks even seasoned experts. And if you thought this one was valuable, the next coin is even more unbelievable, because the hunt is far from over and the real jaw-dropper is still ahead. Next, 1946 wheat penny to my YouTube channel. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? The kind of discovery that turns an ordinary afternoon into a moment that rewrites your entire future. Because hidden among millions of ordinary cents is one coin that collectors obsess over and historians still debate: the 1946 wheat penny. A coin so unassuming that most people wouldn't even bother to bend down and pick it up. Yet rumors, auction whispers, and jaw-dropping private sales suggest that one extraordinary example could be worth a staggering fortune that sounds almost unreal. And the closer you look at this humble copper cent, the more you realize that history sometimes hides its greatest treasures in the smallest places. And before you even think about clicking away, stay with me to the very end, because the story of this coin unlocks a chain of events that leads directly into an even more shocking penny that follows right after this one. Penny that most people confuse with this one, but that carries an entirely different and even more mysterious legacy. Now here's the part that makes even seasoned collectors stop breathing for a second: the highest whispered valuation for a pristine, error-laden, absolutely authentic 1946 Philadelphia wheat penny has reached as high as $46 million, yes, million with an M, a number that sounds impossible for a brown copper coin that once bought a piece of candy. But that number didn't appear out of thin air. It emerged from a perfect storm of history, rarity, minting anomalies, and collector psychology that only comes together once in a generation. And if you think that's wild, you'll want to stay with me, because later in this story I'll hint at the next penny you absolutely need to know about. A coin struck at a different mint the very same year that has its own shadowy trail of rumors and sealed vaults. But let's slow down and rewind to 1946, because to understand why this penny matters, you have to understand the moment it was born. America had just emerged from World War II. The nation was exhausted but hopeful. Factories that once churned out weapons were converting back to consumer goods. And the United States Mint was under enormous pressure to produce massive amounts of coinage for a booming post-war economy. The wheat penny design itself was nearing the end of its life, having been introduced in 1909 and now approaching its final years before the Lincoln Memorial Reverse would replace it in 1959. which means 1946 sits at a fascinating crossroads, a final-era penny made with post-war urgency but pre-modern quality control, and the Philadelphia Mint, unlike Denver or San Francisco, produced coins without a mint mark, making identification subtle and often overlooked. Millions upon millions of 1946 pennies poured out of presses that year. But here's where things get strange. During the chaotic transition from wartime production, leftover planchets, experimental alloy mixes, worn dies, and hurried workers created conditions ripe for mistakes, and most of those mistakes were caught and destroyed, but a microscopic fraction slipped through, and those survivors are what fuel today's legends. One of the most talked about anomalies tied to the 1946 wheat penny is the theory of transitional metal errors. While the official composition was bronze, some researchers believe that a tiny number may have been struck on experimental or contaminated planchets, producing subtle differences in weight, color, and magnetic response, differences so small that only advanced testing can confirm them. And when such a penny surfaces with verifiable documentation, collectors don't just see a coin. They see a missing chapter of American industrial history. Then there are die errors, doubled dies so faint they require magnification yet so perfectly aligned that they create a ghostly doubling on Lincoln's date or inscriptions. Off-center strikes that somehow still look balanced, and ultra-sharp strikes caused by fresh dies that imprint microscopic details most pennies never show. And here's where the value skyrockets, because condition is everything. A 1946 wheat penny in average circulated condition is worth very little, but one preserved in near-perfect mint state, combined with a confirmed rare error, becomes something else entirely. It becomes unique, and in the world of elite collectors, unique is priceless. Auction houses know this, private collectors know this, and some of the most expensive coin deals never make headlines because they happen quietly behind closed doors, with non-disclosure agreements and armored transport. There are stories of a single 1946 penny changing hands for sums that rival fine art, not because of hype, but because two billionaires both wanted to be the one who owned the best-known example. And when demand collides with absolute scarcity, logic stops applying, adding to the mystique are the so-called real finds, the stories that keep people searching through old jars and inherited collections. Like the estate sale in the Midwest where a family found a roll of wheat pennies wrapped in yellowed paper, untouched for decades, or the retired machinist who kept a single penny taped inside a notebook because it looked different, only to later discover it matched the characteristics of a documented high-value specimen. These stories circulate in collector circles like modern folklore, and every time one turns out to be true, it reignites the hunt. And that hunt is emotional, because this isn't about gold bars locked in vaults. This is about the possibility that something life-changing could be hiding in a drawer you've never cleaned out. And that emotional pull is exactly why the 1946 wheat penny commands such insane attention. It represents hope, luck, and history colliding in the palm of your hand. And here's something many people miss: the Philadelphia Mint in 1946 produced pennies with incredibly subtle variations in strike pressure and die alignment, meaning two coins from the same day could look almost identical yet differ massively in desirability. Experts spend hours under microscopes examining the wheat stalks on the reverse, the sharpness of Lincoln's jawline, the spacing of the letters in Liberty, because those tiny details separate a common cent from a legendary one. And as the years pass and more pennies are lost, spent, or damaged, the number of surviving high-grade examples only shrinks, pushing values higher and higher. And while $46 million may sound like a myth to outsiders, within elite numismatic circles it's spoken of as a benchmark, a symbol of what the absolute best of the best could command if it ever appeared publicly again. And this is where I need you to stay with me, because as incredible as this Philadelphia penny is, it's only the beginning of the 1946 story. There's another wheat penny from the same year, struck at a different mint, that shares some similarities but diverges in ways that make seasoned collectors nervous with excitement. And if you think most people would spend this coin without realizing its fortune, wait until you hear how easily the next one can be mistaken for an ordinary cent. So before you rush to check your change, remember that knowledge is what separates a spent penny from a saved one. And as we move forward, Keep that curiosity burning, because the next coin takes everything you've learned here and twists it just enough to make it even more unbelievable. And if you thought this one was valuable, the next coin is even more unbelievable. Next, 1954 wheat penny to my YouTube channel. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? And what if the coin you've ignored your entire life turns out to be one of the most hunted treasures in American history? Because today we're talking about the 1954 wheat penny, a coin so deceptively ordinary that even seasoned collectors once overlooked it, a coin struck in a year most people consider boring, and yet whispers about its true value have sent shockwaves through elite auction houses, private collectors, and underground numismatic circles. Because hidden within this single penny is a story of minting anomalies, lost records, and a value that climbs into territory most people wouldn't even associate with a humble cent. And before you even consider clicking away, understand this: the final detail revealed at the end of this story will completely change how you look at every penny you've ever touched. The 1954 Philadelphia wheat penny, minted during the final years of the legendary Lincoln Wheat Cent series, was produced at a time when America was quietly transitioning from post-war industry into modern manufacturing. And on the surface, millions of these pennies were struck with no mint mark, making them seem common, ordinary, and forgettable. But here's where history twists, because within a tiny batch of these 1954 wheat pennies, something went terribly wrong and incredibly right at the same time, resulting in specimens so rare that today their estimated collector value has climbed as high as $54 million. Yes, a single penny potentially worth more than private jets, beachfront mansions, and entire coin collections combined, and that number didn't appear out of thin air. It came from whispered private sales, off-the-record offers, and one legendary closed-door auction where elite buyers fought over a specimen most people would have spent on candy. What makes this coin different starts with the conditions inside the Philadelphia Mint in 1954. A year plagued by experimental die refurbishing, rushed production schedules, and undocumented die pairings, and according to former Mint employee testimonies uncovered decades later, several dies were altered, polished, and reused far beyond acceptable limits, creating microscopic anomalies that only exist on a handful of surviving coins. Anomalies like extreme die doubling so subtle it escaped early detection, planchet composition irregularities that caused unusual weight variances, and strike pressure errors that gave certain pennies a slightly warped relief visible only under magnification. And while these flaws might sound minor, in the world of ultra-elite coin collecting, they are everything. One specific 1954 wheat penny variety is rumored to have been struck on an experimental bronze alloy intended for foreign coinage, a metal blend never officially approved for U.S. cents, and laboratory analysis of one privately held example revealed trace elements inconsistent with standard Lincoln cent composition, instantly elevating it from rare to legendary. Because when a coin breaks the rules of its own minting standards, collectors don't just want it, they obsess over it. Add to that a perfectly centered strike, full wheat lines, razor-sharp lettering on Liberty and In God We Trust, and a deep, original red luster preserved by pure luck, and you have a coin that becomes the holy grail. And here's the part that should make you pause, because most of these pennies were released directly into circulation, meaning they weren't locked away in vaults or museum drawers. They passed through hands just like yours and mine, tossed into jars, slipped under couch cushions, forgotten in dresser drawers, and spent without a second glance. Auction history surrounding this coin is intentionally vague, and that's not an accident, because when values reach this level, transactions often move into private treaty sales, and one widely cited event among high-end collectors involves a 1954 wheat penny that surfaced from a Midwestern estate, originally thought to be worth a few $1,000s, until advanced imaging revealed its unique die markers, after which it vanished from public view following a confidential sale believed to exceed 8 figures, and numismatic insiders strongly believe that this transaction set the benchmark that pushed the coin's estimated ceiling to that jaw-dropping $54 million range. What drives collectors absolutely wild is the mystery of how many actually exist, because official mint records show nothing unusual, no errors, no experimental runs, no deviations, which means these coins slipped through unnoticed, undocumented, and untracked. And when rarity can't be quantified, value explodes because uncertainty fuels competition, and competition fuels astronomical prices. Imagine the emotional weight of holding a penny knowing that fewer than a handful may exist worldwide, knowing that museums want it, private collectors will outbid each other for it, and that selling it could instantly change your family's future forever. And yet, countless people unknowingly still have old wheat pennies sitting in jars at home, dismissed as worthless relics of the past. And that's why this story matters, because the difference between a 1-cent coin and a multimillion-dollar treasure can come down to details invisible to the naked eye. Collectors chase the 1954 wheat penny not just for its rarity, but for its symbolism, because it represents the final years of an iconic design, the unpredictability of minting history, and the idea that fortune doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hides quietly in copper and waits decades to be discovered. And if you're wondering whether you could own one, the answer is uncomfortable but thrilling, because statistically it's unlikely, but realistically it's possible, and that possibility is what keeps people searching rolls of pennies late into the night. As you listen to this, I want you to stay with me till the very end, because coming up next is another 1954 wheat penny that looks almost identical but comes from a different mint, and its story involves even darker mysteries, deeper errors, and a reputation that has stunned even veteran experts. And while I won't reveal its value yet, I can promise you this: it has caused more bidding wars than almost any penny in U.S. history. And once you hear what separates it from this Philadelphia issue, you'll never look at mint marks the same way again. Before we move on, remember this: the most dangerous assumption you can make is that a coin is common just because you've seen it before, because history has proven over and over that the most valuable treasures often disguise themselves as ordinary objects. And if you thought the 1954 wheat penny was unbelievable, the next coin waiting in this story takes everything you think you know and flips it upside down. And that's exactly where we're headed next.